Welcome, everybody. We are going to start right on the hour. I'm Mark Friedman, and I'm the project director for the Person-Centered Planning for Nebraska DHHS Training for Person-Centered Planning Initiative. And we are very pleased to have you with us as part of this training that we're doing for the public and everyone. Today, we have Michael Callahan, who is presenting on customized employment and discovery. And Michael and I have been colleagues forever, and we're really privileged to have him with us. Michael is the preeminent person about discovery, which is the notion of how you can help somebody come up with what their talents and gifts and beliefs and desires are, rather than fitting somebody into slots, as we too often do. Michael is the key principal with Mark Gold Associates. And Mark Gold was preeminent scholar and implementer of employment for people, employment for some of the people that had the most significant disabilities and impairments and services, and unfortunately passed away at a very young age. And Michael has continued that effort. He is world famous and trains people in discovery around the country and around the world. With that, I'm going to be very brief and give Michael's time, and we're very happy to have you, Michael. It's a privilege and an honor, and thank you for being with us. So you're on, Michael.
All right. Thank you, Mark and David, and good afternoon, everybody. I hope it's a nice, balmy day in Nebraska. I'm sure it probably is not, but I hope winter starts going your way. And I've really been looking forward to this webinar. One of the things you can see by the title, beyond, as Mark indicated several times, of customized employment and discovery. It's the effort to try to make it so that we connect who people are with the work they do, and there's a number of cliches that connect with what we're going to talk about today. One that comes closest to my mind is if you have a job you love, you'll never work a day in your life. It's a wonderful thing to think about, but many of us that have gone to work every day, day after day, sometimes at jobs that did not connect at all with who we were, you really think that that's kind of an empty perspective, not very possible. And what I'd like to talk about today are some ways to make that more possible, particularly for people who might not have had the same responsibilities and expectations as others of us. And certainly that relates to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But there are a host of people in our society that face complexities in their lives and challenges around work that if they go to work, they often find themselves in the worst of the job market rather than in an aspect that fits who they are. And so one of the things that I'm well aware of is that not everybody on the call today works with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I've spent my life doing that. It's my focus. But one of the things that has occurred to me, and I think Mark talked about Mark Gold, who was one of my great mentors, and I think Mark Gold left this to me, and I've tried to take it forward, that when we come up with strategies that we feel like are going to be useful for people with disabilities, we better make sure that they're useful for all of us, that we're not just creating some special kind of service that only fits a small and narrow group. So I will tell you that everything I say today, I feel strongly that I've employed in my own life in one way or another. Tried to do as best I could for my daughter, who doesn't happen to have any impact of disability that I recognize. And it really fits all people. Now, I'm not saying that all of us have to do this, but if you do it, it's a good way to connect with who you are as a person and what your work will be. So let's go ahead and get started. So just some background information that the term customized employment is an innovation. It's been with us since about 2001. Came out of the Office of Disability Employment Policy within the U.S. Department of Labor. And it allows job seekers with a significant impact of disability to avoid the traditional barriers that demand employment often creates. And actually, even though customized employment is in a sense, it meets the definition of competitive employment, it need not be competitive in the root sense of the term competitive employment. You don't have to compete against anybody. So customized is based more on contribution than on competition. And it becomes necessary when strategies such as competitive supported employment aren't working for people. So too often, these job seekers, if they haven't made it in supported employment, they're often considered not to be able to work. And as we've learned more and more about the issue of customized employment, we find, I'm paraphrasing Lou Brown, who was a professor at the University of Wisconsin back in the day, and a dear friend of Mark Gold's, by the way. Lou Brown suggested if you can breathe and have one reliable motor movement, you can work. Well, I would shift that to, if you can breathe, you can work. Now, you may choose not to work, and it may not be the best thing for you to do at a certain time. I mean, if you're in a coma, it's not a real good time to try to work. But really, one of the strong issues of customized employment is that it opens the possibility for all people, period. So we no longer have an underclass of unemployed people that we've worked real hard to determine that they can't work. We just put that aside and move on. And I want to talk to you about, I'm going to tell a number of stories today, and I want to start with Kim, because in so many ways, Kim represents everything that I want to say. And she's also, for me, my touchstone that I always go back to. And as she began her journey for employment, she came out of a school system in the state of Alabama with very great doubts, I think, on the service industry side of the equation, very, very large doubts of whether she would ever go to work. And some of those doubts kind of crept into Kim's perspective about who am I, and how do I think about work, et cetera. And a lot of the tests and evaluations, the vocational assessments that she was given, she did very, very poorly on. And the system doesn't respond well to that. The system takes that information and begins to make reasons of why we shouldn't be serving you, rather than who are you and where do we go with this. I happened to be running a federal project at the time, and we put that aside, and we were just learning about discovery. We were just beginning to understand the issue of discovery. Knew nothing about customizing employment. We had to learn it, actually, in a lot of ways from Kim. And so at least we had the good sense and what we were knowing about discovery to say to ourselves and to say to her, before we try to go assist you to find a job, it would be very nice if we knew who you were as a person. So one of the things about making work fit who we are as people is to start with the premise we have to examine who we are. Now, it can be done, although I think it's difficult and challenging. It can be done as a reflective process. We could just do it ourselves and say, okay, let me think about who I am, read up on some strategies. I think it's best done as a professional service instead of giving someone a test like Kim. What if we set about finding out who she was, looking at the best of who she was, and not even thinking about trying to answer the question, is she appropriate for employment? She'd tell you right away, yes, I want to work, but rather to look and just, who are you as a person? And then use that information to give direction. And we at least did that. And there a lot went on, so I'm going to condense a lot of information for you. We found out that she had two main perspectives. One, she was very interested in fashion. Now, this is a young woman growing up in Birmingham, Alabama, in a situation where she has a lot of disability, just multiple disability. And the notion that and not necessarily in the highest socioeconomic class in that local society. In other words, she didn't have a lot of disposable income to go spend on fashion items, but she still nonetheless was interested. It just always was, as long as she could remember and her parents could remember. That's how she felt. And the other thing, though she struggled with controlling her movements because of one of the disabilities she has, cerebral palsy, she felt that a good way to make a contribution would be using a computer. But she knew from the beginning she would do it very slowly, and that doesn't lend itself to jobs that use computers in workplaces. But nonetheless, we went forward, and through some excellent efforts, both in discovery and in job development representation, Kim ended up in what we call a competitive or demand job in a workplace that came pretty close to matching what she said she wanted. So you see her in front of a computer, and the job she was going to do was in a distribution center for one of the large women's clothing stores in the Deep South. I don't know if any of you would have ever been around in the day. They were bought out a number of times by different entities such as Saks Fifth Avenue and most recently by Belk's. But it was called Parisians, women's wear. And they had a large distribution center in her community. So she's got a job now, and it's about 5 hours a week. And her job is to input pricing data from the items that come into the distribution center. And then she generates the price tags that get shot into each piece of clothing that then goes out to all the local stores across the Deep South. So the job is in fashion, and it's using a computer. And you know, I would love to tell you, and she worked happily ever after. But from the very beginning, the factors of demand that are inevitable in most demand employment started weighing on Kim immediately. And even though she was given a 6-month probation period to reach productivity, she came nowhere near doing that, although her quality was high. And we saw that on the horizon, we had to figure something out because this wasn't going to work. And the mistake we made was to just choose another demand job, and actually negotiated. And I'm embarrassed to say this, but I want to tell you the truth here. Without asking her, a changing room attendant job at a local mall Penny's in the Birmingham area. And that was interesting because, I mean, we didn't even know if she could do that job as far as the demands and the relation to her skills and abilities. But it was just another effort. But there was something interesting that happened along the way. And that interesting thing had to do with Kim's supervisor, the woman that I've moved to a new slide here, the woman that's standing next to Kim in her work area. And that supervisor, over the months that Kim was working, began to recognize attributes, skills, potential on Kim's part, such that she was confronted with something that she had to deal with. And that was, she knew she had a wonderful person, just the kind of employee they needed at Parisians, but Kim couldn't meet the demands of the job. And she did something that I had never heard of a supervisor doing. She went around and talked to other supervisors in other departments, for instance, the corporate buyers and the finance department and reception. And in having those conversations, she came up with a term. This is all Kim's supervisor. Do you have any unmet needs in your work area? Things that need to be done that aren't getting done? Because I've got an employee that I feel like could do that for you. And in a remarkable time, right on the last day of her probation period, when we thought for sure Kim was about to be fired, instead, she was offered this job that we didn't even have words for. We didn't have a place to put it in our lexicon of understanding employment. Later, it's become customized employment, not based on a job description, not based on Kim competing with others, but based on what she had to offer in relation to what the company needed and would benefit from having done. And she worked for over 15 years at this job that was comprised of tasks put together by her supervisor, negotiating as an agent, as it were, with other supervisors in the company, with full approval from the HR manager. And the only reason that job stopped was Parisians got bought out by a large corporate entity, and the headquarters was not in Birmingham, but in Atlanta. And she was actually offered the opportunity to move from Birmingham to Atlanta if she could. But an interesting thing had happened along the way for Kim, and that is her mother, who had been her source of support early, was now needing Kim's financial support because she's working. So this is one of those situations that so many people are in our society, when our parents now become the people for whom we're offering care. And that's Kim needed a lot of support to do that, but nonetheless, she had to shift and start another job. The interesting thing about the story was when I heard it from the staff person who had been working through all of this with Kim and their supervisor. Immediately something went click in my head, something I knew was totally different than I had ever heard before. My first question I asked was this legal? Was it legal for a company to identify tasks and assign them to a worker? And the answer is absolutely yes, unless there's a union contract that says you couldn't do it, an existing union contract. That was not the case in this company. Then it was totally legal. And what do we call it? Well, at first we called it negotiated supported employment. The year here is 1988. And as things evolved in the 90s and into the new century, we were looking for a term that would better distinguish all of this from competitive supported employment. And in 2001, that term was put on the table, called customized employment, from the Office of Disability Employment Policy. But even customized employment had to put in pay its dues. Starting, it was named in 2001. It took all the way to 2014, when Congress finally came together in one of the rare bipartisan agreements of the last decade, and passed the Work Innovation and Opportunity Act, which revised and amended the Rehab Act of 1973 to include a federal definition for this concept called customized employment. This is the law of the United States right here. And because of that, I am going to read it as quickly as I can, pointing out some things. Customized employment means competitive integrated employment for an individual with a significant disability that is based on an individualized determination of the strengths, needs, and interests of the individual with a significant disability. Now let's stop there and look at strengths, needs, and interests. That refers directly to discovery. That what you read there is that's discovery. Instead of testing, the way the law used to say that a counselor had to determine the likely feasibility that the person would benefit in terms of a rehabilitation outcome. Now you found out who they are. What are your strengths? What are your needs? What are your interests? And it's also designed to meet the specific business needs of the employer. And it carried out through several strategies. You can do job exploration. I have no idea what that means. This is the federal law. A lot of times I don't have any idea what federal law means, but I do know what the under B means. Working with an employer to facilitate placement, including customizing a job description based on employer current needs and previously unidentified and unmet needs. I can tell you that phrasing under BI came right from Kim's supervisor. We saw a direct connection. We brought this information to the staffers on Capitol Hill who were putting this law together, and those terms made it right into federal law. Developing a set of duties and work schedule, job arrangement, all this stuff that fits the job to the person. It also offers, this is very important for people with disabilities, a professional agent to take the role that Kim's supervisor took to actually pull this off. This negotiation is not easy. But for those of you who may not have a disability, you can do self-representation. It's also in the law. So, I mean, this is really it just opened the doors to possibility and then provided a funding stream that we had not had in all of those years when we were trying to pay our dues with customized employment and discovery. So basically, customized is about two big things. It's about unbundling and it's about flexibility. It starts with every job description has tasks. If those tasks can be unbundled, if those job descriptions, can be unbundled to get at the component tasks, then those tasks can then be fit to the person. But again, only if it meets an employer need. And flexibility is a universal, what is called a universal design strategy that recognizes all people are complex. And at some point, a degree of complexity, might be disability or it might be another life complexity, can become so overwhelming that work seems to become impossible. It's just not going to work. If employers will offer flexibility and do it voluntarily, then work becomes not just a possibility, work becomes a reality for people. So here's some characteristics of what describes customized employment. It starts with discovery rather than assessment or testing. It avoids job titles. It gets right to tasks. So we never ask an employer, are you hiring? We say, can we talk about how your operations may be improved? It's driven by the job seeker, not by the job market. You're not just bound by what's open out there and that's it. You can actually have a conversation with an employer to get right at the specific things that can make a job possible. All job descriptions are negotiated. They're not pre-existing. That's very important because if they're pre-existing, life complexity is not going to match. It's got to be a part of a negotiation. And it only occurs in regular community workplaces or if you choose, in a self-owned business, a business that somebody actually owns for themselves. Customized is individualized, one person at a time, no groups, no crews, no enclaves. Acceptance of the concept is voluntary on both sides. The employer voluntarily says yes or no. They can just tell us, hit the road. I don't have any needs. I don't want to talk to you. Fine, thank you. I'll find another employer who does. And the job seeker, similarly, must approve any negotiation that is struck between the representative and a potential employer. It's driven by a plan. Most of us call these plans customized plans for employment, that take the information from discovery and actually moves forward with it. And then again, at the end of the day, it's all based on tasks rather than these bundled job descriptions that are so likely to exclude people. A few other things. Pay is at least the minimum wage, often related to entry wage of the business. It's a universal design strategy, so you do not have to have a disability. My first customized job was in 1986. It wasn't named that because the concept wasn't named at the time. But in my work with United Cerebral Palsy, I negotiated all of the features of what I would do in relation to what I needed in my life. And it turned out to be one of the best paid jobs I ever had. Now, I love owning my own business, but as far as a wage job, it was one of the best I ever had. It often uses a representative, but again, if you're capable of doing the negotiation, it's something that people can do for themselves if they have those skills. And if you do have a disability, one of the interesting things, this is, we're not saying that the Americans with Disabilities Act and all of the information that the new paths that it carved out are somehow problematic. But it hasn't been the greatest jobs concept out there. There's still relatively few people with significant disabilities who effectively use the ADA to get a job. So instead, we actually encourage people to say to employers, here's my disability. You need to know this because we're negotiating and we want to negotiate honestly. And we think of a concept called positive disclosure. Most of us, and I know fully half the people on this call, if not more, have worked with people with disabilities. The bottom line is we like those of us who don't have disabilities, like people who do. As much as we like anybody, we like them. So how is it that we do this if disability is some negative aspect in someone's life? Fact is, it's not. It's scary at times, but it's not negative unless it's made so by acting like we've got something to hide. So we encourage people to consider, to give us permission. It can only be done with explicit permission. Give us permission to disclose aspects of your disability so employers will no longer be fearful of what they're facing. That's a powerful thing. We also have found there's a process involved. That process really needs to be followed, and it doesn't have to be this exact process, but it has to be a process that has these features in it. It's got to start with the job seeker, the individual, not the employer and the job market. And discovery is the starting place. And then, because we've for years, decades actually, have had negative paper developed as a result of people coming to services and being assessed and evaluated, we want to create positive paper based on what we learn about the person, a narrative. This is all qualitative research, by the way. If you're into that, discovery is totally a qualitative procedure, and the documents we call profile documents are qualitative positive documents. Then there needs to be a plan that seeks to connect who the person is with what they would like to do in the community. And then the development of materials to help employers understand, customize, and to see the best of the job seeker. Most people don't have powerful resumes of, academic performance and scores of recommendation letters by important people in the community. So we develop what's called a visual resume to give employers an insight into the best that people have. And then job development proceeds with a representative often, and the negotiation is likely to result in a customized job. And once that happens, if the person needs job site support, then supported employment comes in to support the person on the job site. But customized then is this set of procedures done before we ever get on the job. Supported employment is a set of procedures done when the person has the job. But let's talk a little bit about discovery, because it really has a unique role in this. And the first thing discovery does is it avoids the things that create the barriers, such as assessments and tests and other processes, even applying for jobs. Imagine having a significant intellectual disability and being forced to fill out an application in the reception area of a big company. The person doesn't have the skills to fill that out, or maybe they don't read. And then even if they did, they might not have the clarity of language and thought to put together to really talk about the best of who they are. So discovery just seeks to get around all that with a qualitative process that cannot be failed. In discovery, we say often, you start with an A and you end with an A, and there's no way to fail being who you are. So if you think that, then it's a very appealing process to be a part of, whether you're the individual for whom discovery is being facilitated, or if you're the facilitator and just having this enjoyable interaction that is so positively focused. Back in the 30s, an Hungarian scientist named György was awarded the Nobel Prize for discovering vitamin C as an aspect of citric acid. And he was really quite the philosopher. And Dr. György suggests that discovery consists of looking at the same thing as everyone else and thinking something different. One of the most profound things I've ever heard. And it just says, if we can do that on behalf of people, whoever they are, whatever their challenges and complexities are, who aren't thought to be able to work and see something different, then you can just really have a powerful outcome. And discovery and customization work hand in hand. They mesh together in the sense that discovery provides the foundation for understanding who the person is, and customization takes that forward and actualizes it as a concept. And here's some ways to think about it. Here's like the most basic course on discovery I could give you. So we enter into basically time with the person. We commit to spending time. And in doing what? Looking at the person's life as they're leading it. So each person's life dictates unique ways of understanding who they are, because we're all different. But in doing that, it's all going to distill into three basic tenets, or pillars, I guess you could say, of discovery. And the first is what we call conditions for success. Conditions for success relate to those things that need to be in place in order for work to be possible. Let me just give you an example for me. I'm along with, I'll throw my colleagues under the bus here with Mark and David and we're all old farts. And if we had to have a job that required standing up for 8 hours, we probably could not do that job very well. We might do it for a day. We might even make a couple of days, but day after day after day, standing 8 hours a day, not going to work. That's a condition for success, that we at least have the opportunity to sit down. I mean, just that simple. But if you don't think about what those are, then an arbitrarily chosen job may not feature those conditions for success. The middle one is the hard one, but maybe by far the most important, and that is to determine an individual's interest for employment. So often we simply ask, what do you want to do? And just take that. Just asking what interests are is a very cheap way. Discovery suggests, look at what people do, and not just do once, but do more often than occasionally, and follow that. And then what specific potential contributions, not the whole thing. They don't have to have it all, but what specific potential contributions might be, can we understand can be offered. And all of these things, as we go back to Kim's story at the beginning, these were things in one way or another. Her manager knew all of this. She knew what Kim needed to be successful in terms of conditions. She knew what her interests were. She really wanted to work with those buyers who went to Paris and Milan and New York to buy clothing. And she finally ended up doing that because she could support them in unique ways. And she knew those specific contributions. But there's two sides to this issue. And the other side is the employer side. So what do employers get out of customized? Well, one of the things employers get is unmet workplace needs. It's that thing that Kim's supervisor conceptualized and put into place and is in federal law. Things that need to be done in a workplace that aren't getting done. Folks, every workplace I have ever seen, period, has unmet workplace needs. So even if they're not hiring, you can talk if the employer's willing to talk. Also, there are tasks that might be better performed by somebody, often assigned to higher paid workers, who might be able to be done by a worker at an entry pay grade. If you're just going into work, you're not going to go in as if you've been there for 10 or 15 years. You're going to go in at an entry pay grade. If you can perform tasks that a supervisor is doing, and you can do that at an entry pay grade rather than that supervisor's pay grade, there's an incentive for the employer to say, that's a good idea. I'd like to free that supervisor up for that task or those tasks. And then there are just ways that you can specifically improve a company's operations. Now, I know many of you have questions like, well, how do you do this? And it's just beyond the scope of this webinar. Know that all of those of us who provide training and technical assistance in areas such as customized employment have conceptualized strategies to make it so that those of us who are not in all this array of workplaces can learn to go in and have a way of looking at a workplace that allows us to determine how an employer might benefit. It's skill to be learned. It's not years and years and years of experience that's necessary to do this. And here's an interesting thing. This takes you back to school. We got an algebra question or an algebra equation that discovery solves for X. You start with discovery, and it through understanding the job seeker, through their conditions for success, their interest, and their specific contributions. We then can have a starting place that as job development goes forward, we solve for the employer. We always start with the job seeker and then turn our head toward the community and say, okay, we now know who this person is. What kinds of businesses relate to the job seeker that might have an interest in doing this? And then it's just going out and presenting and making the case. It isn't selling, it isn't persuading, and it isn't threatening. It's negotiating. And it's something that can be learned, and it really, really works. We get asked all the time, isn't this just good supported employment? Well, too often supported employment was just sticking someone at the entry level of the service industry and watching that person languish in one of the hardest components of the job market, sectors. It's just a tough place to be. And then when the person would start flagging on their interest, we would say, oh, you got it. This work is so important. You got to stay on this job. If you really, I mean, come on, you want to take care of yourself. So too often, what we hoped was good supported employment was just people hanging on just because they didn't want to quit. But it sure didn't feel like they were not working. It felt like it was a lot of work. So, and then that doesn't even count the people who weren't even considered for supported employment. There's the whole underclass of people that never even made it to supported employment because they couldn't meet the demands. So customized employment, I feel, is just its own necessary approach. And again, the 2014 amendments to the Rehab Act back me up with that. One of the things that you can do to help figure this out, for those of you who deal with both of supported employment and customized, is supported employment occurs after the person has a job, customized before. And I developed a matrix just to help with this. This matrix helps you understand where you are here. On the columns on the left is competitive employment, and on the right, customized. The rows relate to the support that people get. On the top row across is you just get what the employer's got available to any employee. And on the bottom row, you get the services of supported employment, usually in the form of a job coach or an employment specialist. And most people, most voc rehab counselors have their people in the top left quadrant. I would bet if we could find out in Nebraska, a somewhat neighboring state of Wisconsin, for instance, has about 88% of all closures are in that top left quadrant, competitive employment with no support. The remainder traditionally have been in the bottom left quadrant, and that is competitive supported employment. It's a demand job, it's you doing an open job, but you're there. Then what we're talking about today is the bottom right quadrant for people who need both customized employment and supported employment. But some of you are saying, well,
Michael, we have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Will many employers come forward to pay minimum wage for 40-hour week when the output may not justify it?
The output is a matter of contribution. So it's not a matter of output being determined in the traditional way. So if the job seeker wants 40 hours of work, and if the employer has 40 hours of need that is being met, often in various ways, my experience is the answer is yes, absolutely. but it's not, it doesn't, the typical equation isn't there. We're saying that the employer is saying to us, it's important that this task is being done. And if, let me give you an example in a hospital, and it may be in some slides I'm about to show in just a second. So a hospital gets an accreditation visit, and it's found that their hand sanitizers, foam in and foam out, are broken or empty at an embarrassing rate. Okay, somebody's supposed to be doing that. Some employee. It's not getting done. It's a classic unmet need. So the customized employee comes in at about 25 hours a week, but it's not even that. That's just how many hours the employee wanted to work. So it's not a matter of the traditional equations anymore, because if they had offered him 40 hours, he would have said, that doesn't work for me. My conditions for success are at 25. But as far as pay, so he's going to then just test out these hand sanitizers that sit outside of each hospital room. And within 2 months, when the accrediting people come back, they find themselves at 100% compatibility with the norm around hand sanitizers. So what's that worth? He didn't work very fast, but he worked in such a way that it resulted in benefit to the company. Somebody else could have worked faster maybe, but they weren't doing the job because they had already done it and had the issue. So you see, that's what I'm trying to say. So I can't answer the question in the way that most people think about answering it, but I can tell you, if you have somebody that needs 40 hours of work and you can successfully talk to an employer about different ways to meet their specific needs, then the answer is yes. And employers love to think this way. They don't typically think this way, but once they hear it, they go, well, that makes sense. Okay. So, do you have another question right now? Okay. Thank you. Let me finish this and move into some examples. The bottom right, this customized supported employment is where I live my life. But some of you who don't have any disability, but have other issues in your life, might be in the top right. And that is that we're beginning to understand you might not need job site support, but if your relationship with the employer was customized, then it might make work possible. So you don't go for a demand job. You don't just go in and put an application in, because that's not going to get you the outcome of a customized job. Again, there's a whole set of strategies beyond this webinar about how to do that, but that's a way of thinking about this. So let's look at some examples, and I'd like to try to connect for you some ways that who people are ended up in the jobs they have. And this is a man who had 5 jobs. He quit every one of them. He has autism. And in quitting those jobs, he just quit. He just left. The longest he worked was 2 months. The shortest was 2 weeks. And all the other jobs were in the middle of that. And nobody knew who he was. They just said, well, he's skilled and he can do a lot of jobs, but his interest wasn't there. One of the first things we learned in Discovery, he spent most of his time watching cable cop shows. I mean, all the awful reality shows that have been on for years. And at the bottom line, he had an intense interest in police work. If you tried to get him a job as a police officer, I don't think anybody's going to hire him. But if you negotiate, it can result in a job where, as with James, for 20 plus years, he has He has made a contribution at a sheriff's department, doing everything from his first task was dealing with in making sure they were properly filed misdemeanor arrest reports and traffic citations. Today, he works with the Criminal Investigation Division on helping with their filing and sorting, even if it's the whether it's a murder book or whether it's a notes from a deputy. All this stuff needs to be filed and kept, and James is just excellent at doing that. And it just fit his skills. The job was not open, and in fact, the initial task, those arrest reports you see on that table, were sitting in boxes unfiled until he came along. It's a classic unmet need. And employers can often just let things build up. And if you ask, do you have any job openings? No, we're not hiring. Do you have any things that need to be done that aren't getting done that'll help you sleep all night? Oh, yeah, got plenty of those. Here's two brothers that had strong conditions. They wanted to work together, but not at the same time. And they wanted to share a job. I mean, these are tough conditions to meet. And they wanted to work with computers. And so the job developer was, they didn't really care what they were dealing with as much as just those conditions for success. And it turns out the job developer, the gentleman you see standing in the background, was able to negotiate for the brother on the left to start at 8 and work to noon, to 12:30. The brother on the right to work from 12 to 4:30, and they would share a half hour together, which is where this picture was taken. And what they were working for a company that rented audiovisual equipment, and issues like their transportation had to be customized for them, so that the driver that brought the afternoon brother in stayed and had lunch in the building while they spent the half hour together. And just all kinds of creative things had to be put together in a perfectly customized job. This young woman wanted to be a disc jockey in a radio station, but how do you apply for a job as a disc jockey? You rarely see that job title come available. So with a customized job, with going in and assisting the small market radio station to meet its needs, Trang's able to then to get the kind of experience that would one day result in working in a radio station, maybe as a disc jockey. You pay your dues the way other people pay their dues. Tony wanted to be a musician, very similar to Trang. And yet, like a coffee house isn't likely to just hire a person with autism to play music just because they want to play music. So you again get in the area of your skills. Tony treats musical instruments like things on the altar at church. It's just amazing. And he finally, not that anybody's making any money anymore, in coffee houses right now, but he finally was able to get gigs of his own. Carolyn loved childcare, but with her disability was considered not to be able to do all the things that needed to be done. So by focusing on unmet needs, instead of being somebody maybe that had to do the dirty job of a childcare center, which would be changing diapers, she actually was taught to look at escalating behaviors of some of their young kids who in the afternoon would get cranky and actually bite other kids. And they were having regular biting incidents that caused filling out a report and having the state coming in and checking the place, what's going on here. After about 6 months of work, the biting incidents incidences were zero. And Carolyn learned to intervene with kids in a way that de-escalated their behavior. She didn't have to become a behavior specialist to do that. She just needed to be taught how to do it. A large Transamerica field office in Los Angeles needed things delivered in real time rather than sitting in cubby holes in a mailroom. And Sal used his wheelchair to be able to do that. Even though the only part of his body he can move is his head, he was able to go around, have a support by the clerk in the mail room would fill his bag, fill his box. He would go in and deliver in this huge open office space and get information to people in real time rather than waiting for their paper to be picked up at the end of the day. And all kinds of just this amazing job this man had. His mother was so angry that we were even thinking about work for him. You just want to put my son in front of a computer. That's all you care about. He loves to sweep. Let him sweep. And Kurt's without language is saying what she says. So by doing that, we were able to stop slip and falls by Kurt gently but effectively sweeping under the feet of the workers. So where his pay for 6 months was offset by savings in the workman's comp premiums going down. I mean, that's just amazing benefit to the employer and to Kurt. This gentleman
I got to give you a 3-minute warning, Michael.
Yeah, thank you. Wanted to support a sports team. And for about 5 years, he's been doing that at the University of Utah in Salt Lake. Catherine doesn't drink coffee, but loves hospitality. She just loves the act of serving people, and doesn't even drink the coffee that she sells, but loves the interaction. So we had to make sure that for each customer, she got to offer the personal approach. Kevin wanted to be a disc jockey in a nightclub, but just how to even think about that. And so therefore he was assisted to be an event disc jockey. So he has gigs that he does. Not an awful lot. He has to have a day job like most entertainers do. Okay. And because of the unique concept, if you really find a need, almost anyone can work. I mean, I truly believe that. So here's a man just stamping the word sterile on a packet that holds surgical implements in a hospital. I mean, he needs assistance, workplace personal assistance, but he's paid at regular entry wages. And same with this young woman who needed workplace personal assistance to even put a staple through a piece of paper. Worked 11 years at the major newspaper in Fort Worth, Texas, before she died. There are resources for this through MGNA and through others. Our website at markgold.com has plenty of information to help you through discovery and job development. And I hope that this has been beneficial to you. Mark, I'll turn it over to you now. I'm right at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your extraordinary effort on behalf. We're really privileged to have Michael with us. Thank you so much. Michael has helped literally thousands of people across the country and across the world, not only directly, but sharing it with other people. We hope that you'll be able to implement some of these things. On behalf of the Division of Health and Human Services, I want to thank you for your participation. We have another webinar coming up in 2 weeks with Jack Pierpoint and Linda Kahn. It's on the department's person-centered planning website. We encourage you to come and attend, and there'll be a recording of this. It'll be up in a week and a half or so. With that, we thank you for being with us, and we hope to see you in future trainings that we're doing. We're doing family training. Again, it's up on the department's website, and we'll proceed and be doing future. We also have future webinars coming. With that, we thank you for being with us, and we wish you a good afternoon. Bye-bye, everybody.